Well, hi again, folks. Mr. Bleeker here. We're going to plunge into our study of the circulatory system, and I'm pretty excited because there's so much diversity to this unit, so many interesting things to learn about. One, we'll learn about the heart as a double pump, and in Biology 11, we talked about the evolution of the heart from the point where it was a two-chambered heart in a fish, it was three-chambered in amphibians, and it worked its way into a double pump system, basically into a four-chambered heart, by the time we got to the advanced reptiles. Basically, kind of from the alligators and the snakes forward. Well, we're going to study it in the mammalian case as the full fledged double pump, the full four chambers. It makes a very interesting study. Not only do we study the parts of the heart and all the valves and how everything works, but we're going to look at how the heart is adapted and how it works for fetal circulation. There's a few subtle differences there. Then we get to look at blood types, how blood clots, what the 120 over 80 whole thing is when it comes to blood pressure, what hypertension is, and what can happen if you have low blood pressure as well. And then finally, we'll finish off with the lymphatic system, which is sort of like a circulatory system that you might not have thought of. We did talk about this a little bit when we talked about elephantiasis in grade 11. This is a parallel circulatory system that drains fluid from your tissues, and it can get plugged. Um, and we'll get into some of the disorders with it. But if you've ever had a sore throat and you've sort of massaged the glands at the base of your neck, and if they've been swollen, that's your lymphatic system. It doesn't just drain fluid, it's searching for invaders. Your tonsils belong in this system, and yes, we will be talking about them. So, I've got a lot to do, so we'll get to it here. There we go. And here we go. So, your circulatory system, a couple of cool facts to begin with here. Your blood is pretty heavy, and it's sort of you have to think of why that is. Let's change the color there. Your blood is fluid based, largely water based, and when you think about water, water weighs 1 kilogram for every liter of volume. So that's pretty heavy. So 1 liter weighs 2.2 pounds. So that accounts for the weight of basically of your blood. Sort of this average value here of approximately 7%. Enough said. Now, how much blood is in your body? Well, you can think of it as 5 sort of soda bottles, but I think the best distinction of this is about a gallon, like a gallon of milk. And if you filled an empty jug all the way to the top, that would be the fluid volume of basically all the blood in your body. Now, when you go to donate blood, you can donate, make sure my stylus is on here. There we go. You can donate about 1 pint every 56 days. Those are the guidelines. And a pint, you can think of pint as approaching about a liter. And that's quite a bit of your fluid volume, right? You have about 6 liters total in your body. So you really don't want to donate more than that, or that you can have low blood pressure problems. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. The circulatory system, though, you have to think of as being 3 things. So we're going to make a distinction here. I think I want to switch pens. I like that one better. So 1, you can think, well, that was messy. First, you can think of your circulatory system as supplying blood to your body. So when we say that, we're talking about systemic circulation. Now, here's a classic example. If you're in the gym, you're lifting weights, or you're out running, your heart is pumping oxygenated blood full of nutrients and oxygen to your muscles so that you can exercise. So it's sending out to your system, basically feeding your tissues. It also takes away the waste products and things like that, takes that back to the heart and the lungs for a refresh. So there is this systemic circulation, basically the body overall. There's also, Let's see if I can switch the color here. There we go. There's also the pulmonary aspect here, number 2. Now, the pulmonary refers to the lungs. So, your heart, in order to recharge or sort of rejuvenate the blood, will send it to the lungs for an oxygen recharge, and carbon dioxide is basically emitted or released from the blood through your lungs, and you exhale it into the atmosphere. So, we've got blood flowing around throughout your body system. We've got blood flowing to your lungs, and there's a third one that doesn't often get considered. It's sort of forgotten, but blood also flows. Let's change that color there. Let's get to a nice green. There we go. Coronary circulation. And what we're talking about with coronary circulation is blood flowing to the heart itself. So the heart itself is the most important muscle in the body because of what it has to do. It has to circulate oxygen, nutrients, and to circulate waste products for their removal. So coronary circulation, we'll be talking about coronary blood vessels. So we'll be looking at coronary arteries, coronary veins. So 3 forms of circulation that you don't want to forget about. There we go. You don't want to forget about pulmonary, coronary, or blood flowing around systemically. Lungs, heart, and then to your tissues. Enough said. Bam. Now, when your blood's flowing around in your body, we have to identify, before we really get into the structure of the heart, we should talk about the blood vessels. First ones I'll talk about are arteries versus veins. And one thing that's always kind of been a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is, I'm just going to make sure we're still recording here. Yep, good. Just go back to full screen. Is the distinction between arteries and veins. Okay, this isn't really that hard of a distinction, but a lot of people think that arteries carry sort of this yummy red blood, this oxygenated blood. Well, that's true. Arteries do carry that a lot of the time, but that's not the definition of an artery. Just like saying veins carry tired blood, looks kind of bluish. It's always sort of depicted this way. That's not the definition for veins, even though veins do tend to carry sort of tired blood back to the heart. Here's the distinction. Arteries themselves carry blood away from the heart. That's it. And veins carry blood towards the heart. And you'll notice I didn't say anything about oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. And that's something that I did on purpose. Because arteries, by definition, will just carry away from, and veins will carry towards the heart. So keep that definition in mind because it's really important, especially when we get to study the pulmonary system. Okay, now for a little bit of anatomy. I'm going to zoom in on this artery, and what I want to point out is just how muscular it is. When you look at the muscular layer, well, actually, let's just start from the inside. This right here is this is the tube that the blood flows through. Okay, these are called endothelial cells, but we'll sort of give the blood a direction here. And it's fairly thin, just basically one cell layer thick, and it's surrounded in arteries. It's got a nice layer here of connective tissue, right here. And that connective tissue is quite elastic because when blood flows through your blood vessels, it's basically like a surge of fluid. So it's important to have an elastic tissue that can, when it begins, it'll begin like this. And as the blood surges, I'm accentuating it here. but you want the tissue to be able to expand as a surge of blood goes by. So it's important that it has this sort of flexible connective tissue. So you've got the endothelial cells. Now it's formerly known as sort of the inner tube is made up of these cells all around a circle. Then you've got some connective tissue provide support. And then you've got smooth muscle right here. So all of this is muscular tissue. Now you'll notice that's fairly thick. And that's because arteries are quite good at squeezing. In fact, as the blood passes by, it's not a lot different than when you swallow food in your esophagus, and that's called peristalsis. You might have heard of that term before. This wave-like motion right here is a peristaltic wave, and the muscular tissue can squeeze the blood volume down the artery. And arteries themselves, if they're cut, arterial bleeding is something you have to get under control very quickly because of the nature of arteries and because they're so they have this smooth muscle, they'll be contracting, so to speak, and that can squirt blood right out into the air. An arterial bleed is a nightmare and has to be brought under control very quickly because so much fluid volume or blood loss can occur. Okay, so we've got a really formidable muscular layer here. Outside of that, we basically have a wrap of some connective tissue. Now they call this is formally called the tunica externa. What does that mean? That just means that it's an external wrap. Think of tunica as a word meaning wrap, and you wouldn't really be far off. Okay. Now, if we come over here and look at veins in contrast, I find it kind of fascinating. The first thing you'll sort of observe is that in a vein, you've got this little doohickey right here. And you say, well, I didn't see that in an artery. Well, that's because what you're looking at, see if I can move that over. There we go. What you're looking at in this case is a valve. Now, when you examine veins, now these are things that carry blood to the heart. That's the definition of a vein. Think about veins in your legs, for example. As the blood would have to flow up to the heart, and there's this sort of nuisance we call gravity, and it tries to pull. It's obviously going to try to pull your blood down. Now, as blood passes through, let's say this is a vein in your leg, we want that blood to go in just one direction. We don't want the blood to backflow. We don't want it to go in this direction. So what's built into a lot of veins is a one-way valve. So as the blood goes through, the valve snaps, the valve only opens in one way, and it prevents backflow. Now, that's not always the case. We'll talk about varicose veins soon enough, where backflow does become an issue. But here's your tunica intima, right here. This intimate little region right here, okay, that forms the tube. You notice you've got the same sort of elastic layer for support there. But in this case, the muscular tissue is not nearly as thick. Okay? It's much less than you saw over in the case of an artery. So veins themselves, they don't squeeze as well. I'm oversimplifying here, but I like it that way. Veins don't squeeze as well. And one of the things, if you've ever sat still for a long period of time and you've gotten up and you've suddenly started moving, if you've ever seen those little stars, it's because of a sudden pressure difference, usually in your venous system. You created a surge of blood through your veins, and that unequal pressure will make you feel a little bit dizzy. It can make you see stars. People have passed out as a result of it. The thing about veins is they're in close association. If you look at the veins in your, basically just under your skin, they'll look a little bit green because your skin has a flesh tone, of course. But when you look at them, they're really close to the muscle. And as you move, your veins get squeezed on by your skeletal muscle, and that helps to push the blood along quite steadily. So, what I'm trying to tell you here is that veins can use all the help they can get getting blood back to the heart. Okay, the squeezing of skeletal muscles is a definite benefit. So if you stay still too long, well, you're not getting that squeezing, and blood's just not flowing back to the heart like it should, and that's not a great situation. So there we go. Just need to show you something from a couple of my website links. We'll be right back here. Here we go. When we look at circulatory routes, of course, the heart, the most important. The heart is, of course, the most important muscle in the body. Systemic arteries. What I wanted to point out with this, systemically, um, this represents the head region. Okay, and if you come down here, you're basically in the gut. And this hepatic, you might have heard the term hepatitis. Hepa means liver. So let's just call this the gut. Okay, you've got blood flow to the gut. You got blood flow, of course, to the liver. Come down here, lower body extremities, legs, feet, etc. And there are a lot of blood vessels in the head. If you ever see someone get a head wound, it'll bleed quite heavily. There's a great number of blood vessels in the head. But one thing that you can sort of take to heart is even though basically a laceration to the head looks like it's bleeding like crazy, it's not as much blood as you think. It's just kind of shocking to see blood coming out of the head region. It's not really high in fluid volume. It's close to the face, and we tend to overreact about that. The pulmonary circulatory system right here is it's nice how this sort of highlights it. This is where blood goes for a recharge. Tired blood enters, oxygenated blood leaves. We talk about this is another way of looking at it. The heart is a double pump, and I'm going to explain why. One side of the heart is bigger than the other. So you have to think about this heart as lying in someone's chest. So when you look at it, this would be the left side. This would be the right. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, the right side of your heart pumps to the lungs, and the rejuvenated blood comes back to the left side. Now, this is actually more muscular. If you look at this right here, it shows it off quite well. Now, I have to explain. When you pump blood to your lungs, that's not such a fierce muscular action. The heart doesn't have to pump that hard. When you look at the lungs, they're really close by. So the right side of the heart is a little less muscular because it's an easier job. Pumping to the lungs isn't a long distance. However, now here's how I'll explain this. One of the tallest people in the Guinness Book of World Records was 8 feet tall, over 8 feet tall. Now, sending blood to that gentleman's lungs, well, that's not a far distance, right? That's really close. Now, remember, when that blood comes back from the lungs, it's got to be sent to his body. Now, think of the systemic circuit. Really, it's got to be sent to the head and all the way down that 8-foot body, all the way to the toes. You get an idea that that is a very fierce pump. And this right here is the aorta. So when you send the blood out of there, it has to go systemically throughout the body. So that's a pretty heavy lift, and that's why the left side of the heart tends to be a lot more muscular. One more shot of it here. In this picture here, you're seeing a really good shot of the portal systems. So, of course, the head and arms are represented by this portal system here. So in blue, we have our venous system, and in red, here we have our arterial system. And you can see the lungs represented here, left and right, internal organs, and then we'll look at the lower extremities, the legs. The reason why they call these portal systems is because the blood has to go from an arterial system and it has to get to a venous system So what does it go through? What's the door? What's the portal? Well, think about it for a second. As the arteries become smaller and smaller, they eventually become capillaries. And capillaries, I had a student ask me one time, what are capillaries? Are they arteries? Are they veins? And my answer is, well, really, they're neither. They're really small blood vessels that allow nutrients to pass out of them, waste products to pass in, because we need to move all of this material around the body. And if you don't make the blood vessels super thin, nothing's ever going to get out of them because it's a game of diffusion and osmosis. As you recall, diffusion is when, um, let's say, um, let's say you've just eaten a meal, nutrients like amino acids could flow into your internal organs, oxygen could flow into your internal organs by process of diffusion. Get that. And carbon dioxide and other waste products could enter also by a process of diffusion. Water, of course, would do that special form of diffusion that we call osmosis, right? But you need to see the pulmonary trunk system, and this is a classic. You'll see this on every exam ever. So we're going to get into the structure of the heart next. I just have to remember what I had here. There's one more. Oh, this is what I wanted to show you. Okay, right here. When you look at capillaries, oops, lost it. There we go. Capillaries are only basically one cell layer thick. And you can see the edges of the cells here. These are the nuclei. Now, if you think about capillaries, that's not very thick, and capillaries can burst, and that's why we're very aware of things like strokes and why we want to keep our blood pressure under control. You don't want to hold your breath while lifting weights because if you create a lot of pressure, and let's say, for example, the capillaries of the eye tend to come under a lot of pressure, you can burst capillaries. And it's only one cell layer thick. There's no tunica intima, right? There's no connective tissue supporting it. There's no muscular layer. There's no outer wrap or tunica externa. So capillaries are meant to be thin so that things can pass in and things can pass out of them. And that's smart design, but it's also quite fragile. And as I say, you worry about things like high blood pressure, known as hypertension, because it can lead to strokes and problems, obviously, with our capillaries. Okay, so one moment here. Just a few capstone items here. Um, I don't want to miss. There we go. Just make sure. There we go. All right. So arteries and veins, you should be able to do sort of a compare contrast, right? Where, let's just put a distinctive line here. We'll look at the muscular walls of arteries. And please, on a standard test, one of the distractors will be, we'll ask you whether or not arteries have valves. Well, arteries don't need valves because they can keep blood going in one direction. They're not worried about backflow. So please tell me that they don't have valves. Okay? Valves, veins, letter V, we get it. Okay? Let's just switch color. There we go. They're capable of squeezing blood along, and that's the reason you could get a very bad arterial bleed if you nick one. In the movie Bram Stoker's Dracula, you always hear about the vampires going after the jugular vein. But if a vampire really wanted to bite and wanted to get a quick meal, it would go after the carotid artery that's in the neck, because if that artery is punctured, it will literally split blood directly out. I know it sounds morbid, but the carotid artery would certainly get the job done a lot faster. They carry blood from the heart. Okay. Make sure you have that distinction, because when I come over to veins, these carry blood towards the heart. The one that I would point out that's really important, the vena cava, brings blood back to the right side of the heart for a recharge. Not to worry, we'll be getting into those details soon enough. But this is it is quite a big topic. There we go. Skeletal muscle, as I said, is really important to move blood along because veins aren't very muscular. And they've got these little one-way valves to help make sure that blood does reach the heart because, of course, there's very little muscle with veins. They're not the most muscular of structures. I kind of draw on this, but it's good to show you this. When you look at arteries, when a blood surge comes along, you will get this pressure against the wall of the artery, like that. And that's something that we can detect. In fact, that's how we detect blood pressure. Now, when the surge goes through, that surge actually gets a name. It's called systole. And and after the surge goes by, let's make a distinction here. That's called systole, which is the pressure on the walls, which is quite high. And afterwards, you get something called diastole. And what diastole is the pressure after the blood vessel returns kind of to normal. And it's the resting pressure of blood in the blood vessel. We use basically cuffs on your arm to explain this. So I'll just introduce the two concepts for now: systole and diastole. Blood surging is systole. Diastole is really after the blood is gone by, standing pressure. Here's a really great shot, really good shot of, let's see there. There we are. Here is a valve, and the idea with the blood flow goes through there like that. So you could think of these as being two flaps of tissue that seal kind of along one axis, and as the blood goes through, it opens up, and when there's standing pressure, the two sides just basically seal together to prevent backflow. There you go, veins. It's important to point out, where do you sort of stop and think for a second? Where do you think you would find? Not, I did say that not all veins have valves, so sort of think about gravity for a moment. Where would you put valves in the body to prevent backflow? Would you put them in the upper portion of the body, or would you tend to put them in the lower portion of the body, below the heart? I'll tell you, the answer is you put these valves in the lower portion of the body because you don't. That's where gravity is pulling the blood down. It's more of a concern. The veins above the heart, gravity is of course helping lead back towards the heart. You don't find as many valves in the upper portion of the body because that's leading with gravity down to the heart. It's not such a concern. And here we go. I didn't want to say a lot about this. These are called varicose veins, and let's explain what happens. When the valves in you're all young and healthy. When you look at the valves in the lower leg, they're doing what they should. Now I'm just going to draw them bigger than they are. They're opening up and they're letting the blood go through in a regular fashion. That's a good thing. Now, if these valves become a little bit tired and they don't do the job they should, you can get what's called backflow. So instead of having that nice flow in that direction, you can get a little bit of backflow like this. And if that backflow continues, you're kind of at the mercy of gravity, and you'll start to get pooling going on in some of the blood vessels. And the pooling can cause deformation of some of the nearby veins. And what you get is a painful condition that we call varicose veins. And you can see here that the veins have become malformed, the valves themselves have become malformed. One of the remedies for something like this is to wear very tight fitting clothing to increase sort of squeezing or pressure on the veins so that the blood flows in one direction. In extreme cases, they'll remove varicose veins, but that, of course, causes a lot of pain for the patient. It's not a really great experience, to say the least. Okay. Um, Capillaries themselves, just kind of before we get into the structure of the heart, I promise it's coming. Capillaries themselves are extremely thin. And what I really like about a picture like this is it shows, there we go, it shows how you lead down from an artery. So if an artery, well, let's just draw a letter A up here, represent an artery. As arteries get smaller and smaller, their name gets longer and longer. Notice that this is called an arteriole. So if you think of an artery as a river branching into streams, those streams are the arterioles. Let's just grab a slightly, no, green should do. Now, as you come through the arterioles, you enter into the capillary system like this. Now, there are a few interesting little spots here. You notice right there that there's sort of like a little muscle. And on some of these, you see like little muscular connections. You can see them here. And these are little, what we call sphincter valves. If you are cold, for example, your body will squeeze these little sphincters and they won't let as much blood go through the capillaries. So it's kind of important. If you're really cold, you want to cut off the blood flow to the extremities and keep the blood in your core. Essentially, what will happen is these meta-arterioles, they have little sphincter valves in them, and they can shut off flow of blood through the capillaries like that. And if you do that, you can keep the warm blood back up there. And that's our bodies will sometimes do this. This is a homeostasis technique to stay warm. However, let me clear this now. The normally what blood would be doing is it would be flowing down through the arterioles, through these meta-arterioles, and then it enters the true capillaries, these really thin networks. And these are so thin that red blood cells can really only fit through one at a time. This is a really tight junction, but the good news is there's lots of junctions. And as it goes through here, what will happen is that the oxygen that it was carrying will flow out into the tissues because all our cells need oxygen. And carbon dioxide, which is a waste product. Remember, the mitochondria are like little gas-powered generators and they're burning carbon products. And that carbon product has to be returned, eliminated from the body through the lungs. So CO2 will diffuse in like that. Well, that's a terribly drawn arrow, but hopefully you get the idea. Additionally, nutrients will flow into the tissues. And waste products, I just need a little more space, so I'll just do this. Wastes will diffuse in. And that's really the overall scheme, and it's why capillaries are so darn important. They're really not very wide, but they're extremely thin. And again, I've got to impress this on you. They are one cell layer thick. You ever? I don't know if you've ever noticed or seen this before. Grandmas pinching little kids' cheeks, and that's sort of interesting. If you ever wonder why that was done, it was done to bring blood to the surface of the skin. If it's done too hard, you can break the capillaries, and some broken capillaries can look like little. They're not spider veins, but they'll look like little red squigglies. They can heal up, but they're quite fragile. So pinching the cheeks when you become a grandpa or a grandma, don't hang on to the kid's face that hard. Okay? Point of capillaries is to allow for this exchange and to have arterial blood give way to venous blood. Essentially, an exchange from the arterial system into the venous system. That's the whole idea. There's got to be some kind of a switchover. Okay, so now finally we'll get to the heart. Now the heart, I like this view. Um, this, of course, here is a frontal view in this case. And what you're seeing here is what we call a cross section. Imagine if you'd cut through somebody with a sword and you just looked straight down. That's what you're looking at here on the right. You're looking at a cross section. And the heart itself is about the size of your fist. So if you take your fist and put it kind of in the center of your body, your right fist, and you twist it a little bit facing to the left, that's how your heart sits in your body. It's not perfectly symmetrical. It's not dead center in the middle like this. It's actually just a little bit off to the left side, which is why we wear our poppies on the left, because our heart tends to be on the left a little bit more. Point of distinction here: your heart is in a bag. It's in what's called the pericardial sac, and it's important to bag your internal organs with a membrane that protects them from infections, basically gives them their own little watery environment. It's pretty important. And that little bag, the pericardial sac, which I've kind of drawn here in blue, can get infected. You might have heard of pericarditis. It's sort of like a pain of the heart where there's nothing wrong with the heart. So, yes, interesting trivia. Okay, know this for the upcoming quiz. No, I'm kidding. If you were to go into medical school, you would end up knowing all of these structures. Some of them you already know. I referred to the carotid artery in the neck right here, right? There it is. Ooh, wait a minute. Let's not use that one. Let's use that one. So your carotid, it's a little deeper, but this is it here. Just undo to make a point there. Your jugular vein is above it. Your jugular vein is right here. Right? Vampire's favorite. And there's just a huge number of blood vessels you could go through. Subclavian, the one that goes under the clavicle. The one that's in your arm. The femoral vein in your leg. The names just go on and on. There's just so many. Busy drawing all over everything here. This isn't something you'd be expected to know in Biology 12, but this is the overview of just how many there are. Some of their names are pretty obvious. Tibial vein, right? It's near the tibia in your leg. Okay, this is just an overview. Don't worry. Just a quick view of the portal system. And now you know that what you're looking at are capillary beds in each one of these cases. There's one in the gut, picks up nutrients. There's one in the liver right here. And it's pretty important to have a capillary bed in your liver. I'm going to explain why. Because if there's toxins in your blood, your liver will filter them. Here's an interesting point something you really need to pay attention to. When you eat something, you might notice right here that your gut makes a quick trip over to the liver. And that's called the portal system, the hepatic portal system. You want to make a quick trip over to the liver because if you ate something that was poisonous or you consumed something that could endanger your homeostasis, you might want to give your liver a chance to deal with it first. So that's a pretty smart design. But anyways, there are your capillaries and there's your double pump system right there. And what I'm drawing in blue, in this case right here, that's the septum or the wall that separates the left and right sides of the heart. Now, it's really important that you're aware that when you're looking at a heart, in this case, you have to think about it. You're staring down as if you're looking at the patient. So this is the right side of the heart here, and this is the left. That's an important distinction. If you ever go to do heart surgery, please remember the difference between your left and right side of the heart. In some cases, surgeons will actually write on the patient, just to avoid any confusion. I don't think that's a bad thing. Another view of the pulmonary circuit, and I've kind of gone into this already, so I don't want to spend a lot of time. Some of my slides just go into a lot of detail, but suffice it to say, the right side of the heart, and I think I better switch away from my old blue color here. A little more distinction. There we go. Ooh, not red. Definitely not red. There we go. The right side of the heart, being here, this side, is going to send blood to the lungs for a recharge. The left side of the heart takes that payload of blood back and sends it off to the body. Okay, just one moment here. Yeah, I just wanted to see how far away I was. Doesn't show me a preview. I did mention that the left side is bigger because it has to pump to the left side. Let's just actually say the left side pumps blood to the systemic portion of your circulatory system, right? By systemic, you can think of it as most of the body, and that's the reason why it's larger. And coming up a little bit later on, we'll in the lab we'll dissect a heart and we'll actually look at its muscularity, and you do see that the left side is a lot thicker once you sort of cut it in half and take a close up. Okay, so the heart is a double pump. Okay, now these are the structures of the heart. There's some old names we'll have to talk about, but I've got a better way to visualize this. If I can get to my here we go. We can get to our where were we here? There we go. This is a nice, simple sort of what we call an animated GIF, and you can see the blood coming up through the vena cava to the right side of the heart. Now, we'll run this a few times, but this portion right here is called the inferior vena cava because it's just a little bit below the heart, and this is the superior vena cava, superior meaning above the heart. So if we run that again and follow this, you'll notice that the blood will flow into this chamber first, which is called an atrium, and then it'll go into the ventricle. So this is kind of the order when the tired blood comes back. It comes back to the right side of the heart, and it'll go out to your pulmonary system here, go through a pulmonary artery. Now you're going to look at that for a second. You're going to say, whoa, I thought arteries carried red blood. No, this is the one time that you will see blue blood, well, not blue blood, but tired blood in an artery, deoxygenated blood. You'll see deoxygenated blood lead away from the heart. And the definition of an artery is a blood vessel that leads away from the heart. The blood leading away from the right side of the heart needs a recharge, and it's going to the pulmonary system. So it should look tired and deoxygenated like this. When it returns to the left side of the heart, it will come back via something we call the pulmonary vein. And you can see one of them here. And that's the only time that you'll see oxygenated blood in a vein. In the pulmonary system, the oxygenated blood is in the veins and the deoxygenated blood is in the arteries. It's just a little bit backwards from what you usually suspect. Okay, now for sort of parts of the heart. So, as far as parts of the heart go, here's our superior vena cava, which we just looked at here and here. And when you lead into the heart, you'll lead into the atrium, which will the atria lead down to the ventricles. So there's your, oops, haha, there's your right atrium there and your right ventricle there. If we come over here, this right here, this structure here is your left ventricle, or sorry, left atrium, and this is your left ventricle. But if you take a cutaway of the heart, you see some really kind of interesting things. Um, right now, there's a valve here, and we'll take a close up of this. You'll see that there are valves in between the atria and the ventricles, and you'll see that there are valves that open to let blood out of the ventricles, leading away, for example, to the basically to the lungs. This is a pulmonary artery, and this valve right here will let blood out the aorta. So some of the valves that are quite important, these valves are, as a group, are called the atrioventricular valves, or the AV valves. They let blood through from the atrium into the ventricle. Now they're slightly different in shape. When you look at the valve here, this is called a tricuspid valve. And the reason it's called a tricuspid is because it's essentially a three-flap valve. So a tricuspid valve, and I had one open. There, it's perfect. It's exactly what I wanted. The tricuspid valve itself has three flaps of tissue like this. Here's how you remember. You have a tricuspid in the right side of the heart. Think of the R in tricuspid, and that'll help you remember that this AV valve is in the right side of the heart. In the left side of the heart, you've got what's called a bicuspid valve, or a two-flap valve here. So these are both AV valves, but this is a three-flap version, and this is a two-flap version. So interesting little sort of distinction for you there. Now these valves themselves, when the atria contract and they send the blood into the ventricles, what's to prevent the valve from blowing right back? Well, you have, let's see if I can, there we go. You have these little white structures right here, and you see that they're sort of anchoring. And those are like little tendons, and they prevent the valves from blowing back into the atria. You want the blood to flow one way. So these tricuspid valves are held down by these little tendons called the chordae tendineae, these little white ones here. Over here, you can see them. There's two here because this is a bicuspid valve, and they're attached to these little muscles down here called the papillary muscles. Those papillary muscles basically hold the valve down so that blood can only flow one way. So this is some important anatomy that you never saw before, because you want the blood to flow, of course, from the atrium into the ventricle and then to go out through the appropriate major sort of blood vessel. So you should take a look at these ones. This, of course, the right atrium, that's our tricuspid. Over here is our bicuspid valve. Now, that's sometimes called the mitral valve. That's an older name, and I think I'll talk about in class as to why they call it the mitral valve, just to save a little bit of time. Here's a hint. It sort of looks like the Pope's hat. When you lead out to the pulmonary system, this is called the pulmonary valve, which is an apt name. It's good that they named it that way. And this one here, when you lead out of the left side of the heart, out the aorta, that's called the aortic valve. Now, you see there that they're saying SL, and it stands for semilunar. Let me explain why. If you look at semilunar valves, the structure of them is it's it's kind of interesting. They refer to it as being sort of a little bit moon shaped, semilunar, or sort of, and I have had a better picture of this in the past. I think this will do. I'll zoom in to show you here. Okay, if you look at you follow my cursor here, these look like little crescent moons. That's why they kind of got their name. So they say they're sort of moon shaped. And it gives them a lot of strength because these things have to pop open all the time to let blood out to the lungs and to let blood out through the aorta. Uh, that's sort of a major journey each time. And it's actually these, when you hear, you'll hear that familiar lub dub sound if you ever listen to your own heart, and you think you're listening to the atria and the ventricles contract. You're not actually hearing that. What you're hearing are the opening and closing of these valves. So as they open and then snap shut. So there you go. They say that they're semi-lunar, but they're really named after which structure that this is in. So this is sometimes called the pulmonary valve. This is called the aortic. And that's sort of just the overall structure of the heart. Once you know the structure of the heart, though, you should look at what's called the cardiac cycle and how blood sort of loads and charges throughout the heart. And there's quite a bit here. We haven't even talked about the electrical system of the heart. Um, we'll talk about the electrical system later and how it controls the timing. But right now, we'll just see the effect. Okay. So when blood comes from the vena cava, give it a second here to catch up with me. Um, Here's your superior vena cava. Here's inferior vena cava. Um, this, of course, will arrive to the right side of the heart. Right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. And of course, here's an analysis of the valves that we were just looking at. So the heart itself is walled off. This is the major septum that separates the left and right sides. It's why we say that the heart is a double pump. Okay, pause. So right now, as blood has come from the vena cava, it's going to go out to the pulmonary system here through the pulmonary valve, which is semilunar, and this will lead off to the left lung, and this will lead off to the right lung. So we refer to these as the pulmonary arteries, and they branch because they're going to head to a whole bunch of little capillaries soon enough. Now, when the blood returns, and I just lost it there a second ago. When the blood returns, it will come back. Whoa. There we go. Doo-doo-doo. There. Pause. The blood will come back to the left side of the heart through the pulmonary arteries. So it'll come in here, and that's the left side of the heart, into the left ventricle, and the squeezing of the left ventricle will send it out through the aortic valve right here, up through the aorta, and that plunges down. We saw how this goes out to the kidney, which we just studied. It also goes to the upper part of the body here, through these major blood vessels that lead up to the head. So a lot of blood can get to the head quite quickly because, well, you want it to lead to the brain. So now we could see a little bit more of a visualization of the charging. This is just a little bit more apt. And the tricuspid valve will open. There you go. And we'll just focus on the right side of the heart for now. And you'll see the blood here sort of tired. It's come back from the body. It has been cleaned by the kidneys, though. It's just really deoxygenated. And once the ventricle squeezes, it'll go out through the semilunar valves here, the pulmonary valve. And it'll go off, obviously, for a recharge. And the valve will snap shut, and that's what you'll hear in the in the lub sound of the heart. Now, here with the pulmonary veins, it says left pulmonary, of course, because you're looking at the heart as if it's in someone's chest. So the oxygenated blood is returned to the left ventricle, and it will be, once this is charged, there we go, we'll see the bicuspid valve snap shut to prevent backflow, and the blood will be sent out through the aortic semilunar valve up into the aorta. So this is why I looked at this animation. It's a great one. And go to the body. You notice that the left and right side of the heart, they're independent. Their their timing their timing similar, but like I say, this is a double pump system. So there you go. You've seen basically you've seen the cardiac basically the cardiac rhythm, the charging of the heart, sending blood where it needs to go. Okay, so okay. Um, Start with the vena cava and work your way around the body, knowing where the blood arrives and what it travels through as it leads out through major structures. You should be able to tell the story of the blood path through the left and the right side of the heart. And one of the best ways to do this is literally to write your own crib notes. And in words, in pictures, you could say it to yourself. You have to be able to say the structures the blood traveled through and how it came back to the other side of the heart.